It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by HP. Whenever you do your best thinking, the HP Spectre X360 is ready when inspiration strikes. With power save for battery life and focus mode to multitask, you can do your best thinking whenever and wherever it happens. The HP Spectre X360 2-in-1 convertible PC with Windows 10 saves battery life for whenever an idea hits you. HP Spectre X360, a more thoughtful laptop.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. We have one game in the books, preseason game number 1, the Hall of Fame game, Steelers and Cowboys. Matt, I know you've covered this game a ton already, more probably than it needs to be covered, but let's talk about it a little bit because we've got some real football. We saw some players running around on the field. At BD Peacock on Twitter, at Williamson NFL is where you can find us. Get those questions going for our next Twitter Tuesday episode. We might even have some time today to get into some of your leftover questions from last week. Still have a lot of good ones. There's always good questions that come in every day to Matt and I on Twitter. But Matt, since you've watched this game so intently and have covered it, did post game on it, you cover the Steelers, I got to go to you first. You're the best person to talk to about this football game, since I have to admit, I did not make it through the fourth quarter of this game. In fact, I didn't make it into the second half of this game because I did have a slow pitch softball game, and I thought, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna record it. Probably not going to come back and watch the end of it because it was just before halftime when I left the house, and I did not come back. I did not feel the need to come back and watch the second half of this game. So you have to fill in those gaps for me. But let's start with the beginning of the game. We did see some Chase Claypool and some Deontay Johnson. We did see some Micah Parsons out there. So there were some names on the field to start.
Yeah, there were. And I didn't think Najee Harris would be part of it. And he got, 5 or 6 carries, something like that. Of course, I paid intense. I was very intent on watching every play and took some notes. But then we did the post-game show, which we finished up at 1:15 a.m. and then I had to drive home from there. So I haven't watched the game a second time. My apologies, but I don't think you missed a whole heck of a lot, to say the least. And I always say this: the Hall of Fame game's amongst the most anticlimactic events of the NFL season. I'm not going to super nerd out with, third string Steelers that I'm talking about that may or may not make the team, or this 5th round pick looked good, or James Pierre made a play and maybe he'll make be in the mix at the cornerback position. I'm not going to get that nerdy on it, but it was great to see football. You mentioned Claypool. He made a big play. I saw this right before the game. The over-under for this game was like 25 or 26 or something like that, and it still went under. Like, no one expected there to be points, and there wasn't. There were missed kicks, and, it was not super eventful. But you did mention Parsons and Claypool and Deontay, and those guys showed up a little bit too. It was, I was happy to watch it, but you have to be pretty nerdy to really get into that game.
Absolutely. Parsons getting in on a couple tackles.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, Najee Harris was in the game. You weren't sure if he was going to play at all. Did get 7 carries for 22 yards. Not a huge yards per carry average there for him, but get the rookie some action, see some live bullets, see some people trying to hit him for real. Kalen Ballage got in the end zone on the ground for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That just not really a who's who when it comes to quarterbacks. You got the Ben DiNucci in there.
Right.
I like Ben DiNucci's throwing motion. It's so smooth. It looks almost like a golf swing the way he throws. But I want to shake him and be like, hurry up your process or something. Like, just get the ball out of your hands. It's too nonchalant looking almost, even though it's super smooth. Cooper Rush, Garrett Gilbert, Mason
Dwayne
Rudolph,
Haskins was kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, Haskins. I was going to ask you, did anybody stand out? Did you see something you liked from any of those guys?
Josh Dobbs played too. He's not terrible. So the Steelers' 3 quarterbacks, at least, were all NFL quarterbacks. There's been a lot of buzz around Haskins, I will say, in camp. And I thought he played the best of the three Steeler quarterbacks, and ball comes out of his hands better than those guys.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that he's a better thrower than Rudolph or Dobbs or any of the Cowboys guys that were there. And I always thought, boy, Haskins is a real statue in the pocket. And I will say he's either lost weight or worked on his feet or whatever, but he's moving around a lot better than he did in his Washington days. And I assume the Steelers have been pushing him in that direction. We'll see. I mean, there's a little buzz here that he could unseat Rudolph for the number 2 job. I mean, that's about as high hopes as there are. Not that, he's going to be the next Hall of Famer after Ben or anything.
Chase Claypool was the most heavily targeted receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers with 4 targets. He had the 45-yarder. Is Claypool potentially the guy there? Like Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, is there potential for, is that a 1A, 1B? Is it a 1 and a 2? Is it, Juju still around? Is Claypool potentially the guy where we're like, oh my God, what were we thinking? This is actually the dude.
Sort of. Well, side note, Juju to me is clearly the 3.
Big slot
and
guy.
Big slot guy and, a good player, obviously. And then James Washington, just like an hour ago, reportedly requested a trade because he's stuck behind these 3 and only has 1 year left on his deal. I think Washington could play for a lot of teams. I think he's a pretty good player, but more like a 3 who's stuck in a 4. Last year showed us, though, when Deontay was healthy, he missed some time. He left the game early. He averaged, I think, the 3rd most targets in the league. I think only Adams and Diggs average more targets per snap, targets per game, however you want to figure it out. So Deontay really took on the Antonio Brown role as close as you can come. But Claypool's more talented, and they used him more in this game, throwing him out routes, deep ones. There's one that was right off his fingers he could have completed. I think his upside's higher, but I think Deontay's the more targeted player no matter what. I mean, they sort of remind me of Lockett and Metcalf a little bit.
Kendrick Green, did you like what you saw from him there? A potential future starter as a rookie?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is getting pretty nerdy, but they only started – he's the only one of the offensive linemen that has potential to start and that played in this game for the Steelers. And the backup line held up pretty well. Green looks good. There's a lot of buzz around him. I'd be shocked if he's not the starter. So, I mean, little things, but I mean, so many good players were not in this game for both teams.
Oh, right. Especially the Cowboys. Like there was just nothing when
they
were
travel.
When they had the ball. It was like, what is going on here? They scored 3 points in the first quarter, and that was it for them. There's at least, I think, a little bit more name value. Some guys who are actually going to play. I mean, Rico Dowdle, is he going to be anything? I mean, maybe the number 3 there, Tony Pollard. I like what I saw from him. He's got some juice, but he only touched the ball a couple times in that game. And even the receivers, none of the top 3 guys were involved at all for the Dallas Cowboys. So it's hard to really talk about much that happened there with them. We got Brandon Eagles, so unfortunate name for a Dallas Cowboy. Cedric Wilson, Turner, Parker, like there's just there's nobody I think that got me excited there. Semi Fehoko, the rookie, I don't know if he's going to be able to crack that lineup as a rookie. He might have to make some waves on special teams as a gunner to start his career. Micah Parsons was really the only big name, and it was nice to see big, fast Micah Parsons out there, but he didn't play much either.
No, exactly. I mean, Dallas really held people back. I don't think Dak or a couple of the other guys even made the trip, so I'm not sure these teams took it super seriously. It's a big deal for the middle of the roster and lower guys without question, but I don't think our listeners want me to get that nerdy on, the Steeler punter, competition.
I think, I'm looking at betonline.ag. I don't see the Steelers punter odds on there right now, so we can definitely skip that one. And like when it comes to Dak, I don't think Dak's going to play a snap in the preseason, and Big Ben might not either, right? Are they trying to figure out this backup thing more than getting Big Ben some reps?
Absolutely. I mean, I bet he plays a series or something like that. I mean, I was shocked Harris played the first round pick, but I guess you want to give him some reps. But yeah, I mean, I think these teams are not, especially with the extra game in the regular season, are afraid of the long-term consequences of playing guys now, especially guys that they trust.
Big Ben gets hurt tomorrow. How much do the Steelers give the 49ers for Jimmy Garoppolo?
That might be an off-season thing that you and I have to have a little hash out between GM.
There's going to be a lot of fun ones, I think, when it comes to the Steelers. If this is the end for Big Ben there in Pittsburgh, and it seems like it should be. I don't know. We'll see how it goes this year. But there's some intriguing options. Big name guys, some handsome fellas like Jimmy Garoppolo and Aaron Rodgers out there potentially for the Steelers. And I think I know which one you would prefer to have as the Steelers quarterback next year. But yeah, that's a conversation for another day, most likely. Maybe some potential movement with the waves that Trey Lance is making in camp with Jimmy G, but he does make a big salary, so I think something catastrophic would have to happen for some team for that movement to happen in the preseason. But I do want to preview an episode next week. Obviously, we're going to cover everything with the Hall of Fame speeches, probably not a ton, but on Monday's show. But coming up next week, I want to talk about our favorite players we are looking forward to seeing in the preseason when they actually do allow all these players on the field. I think that'll be a fun episode. Go through position by position and just pick a couple players for each position group that we're excited to see in preseason games.
Yeah, that will be fun. I haven't given a lot of thought, but Jordan Love has to be the top of the list. You know what I mean? Last time we saw him was in college, and there's been so much buzz around him, and we don't even know if he's good, bad. We don't know anything about him as an NFL player.
Right. There's so many rookies and then so many second-year players that we didn't see. So it's going to be a fun preseason, I think. I'm looking forward to this preseason more than any I can ever remember in my life. Next, let's take a few Twitter questions. Let's talk about Mike Sando's QB tiers that we covered last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago now that we covered. But now he's got them ranked with what are teams' opposing quarterbacks? So who's got the toughest and the easiest schedule when it comes to facing opposing quarterbacks according to those tiers in the NFL? Built Bar has so many delicious flavors. There is something for everyone at Built.com. When you talk to a Built Bar fan, they're definitely passionate about their faves. If you don't know, the Built Bar flavors, you're missing out because there's so many good ones. Peanut butter, my number one. You got coconut, cherry, barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream, German chocolate. Those are the originals, but they are always rolling out specialty flavors. So go to Built.com, buy yourself a box, mix your own box of Built Bars. Not only are those Built Bar flavors the best tasting protein bar out there, they are healthy too. Check out the macros. 17 to 18 grams of protein. Calories ranging from 130 to 180. Only 4 or 5 grams of sugar and only 4 or 5 grams of net carbs in every bar. Amazing flavors, all tasty, all healthy, and Built Bar is the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and you will get 15% off your order. That is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% at Built.com.
David Harrison here, the Locked On Washington Football Team podcast, celebrating with you a 21-grain salute to a less boring sandwich thanks to Dave's Killer Bread. I don't know about you guys, but when I eat pizza, I eat it for the toppings, not the crust. And when I eat a sandwich, it's for what's inside the bread, not for the bread. But when I throw a sandwich on 21 whole grains and seeds, thin sliced bread from Dave's Killer Bread, it is the epitome of addition by subtraction. That thin sliced bread lets me focus on what's inside the sandwich, but also adds to the sandwich with killer taste, killer texture, killer nutrition, a subtle sweetness, and a seed-coated crust. Dave's Killer Bread is America's #1 organic bread for a reason. It tastes so stinking good. Dave's Killer Bread is made with the highest quality organic and non-GMO ingredients and is power-packed with whole grains, fiber, and protein. Visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store.
Shout out to Mike Sando. Does such great work for The Athletic. He's a friend of the program. We used to have him on every single week. We got to have him on, I guess, sometime soon in the preseason, right, to maybe talk about some of these things. We haven't talked to Mike Sando in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually just kind of dawned on me. Sando is a Hall of Fame voter and is always at the big events. So maybe I'll see him this weekend, come to think of it. I should drop him a line and see if he's going to Canton, because I'm driving up Saturday morning, spending Saturday night there, and doing 2 3-hour shows. So hoping on Radio Row to see a bunch of the big-name national people.
There you go. Do some face-to-face. We'll talk to him about all this Hall of Fame stuff maybe next week and some of the quarterback
He's very involved with the Hall of Fame stuff, by the way.
And I love how many people he talks to. He has so much good information and conversations he has with scouts and GMs and players and coaches around the league when he's doing lists like his quarterback tier. So he has such good information. I'm sure all the quotes don't make it into his articles.
No, 100% not. And one of my favorite things, just a quick Sando aside, there was about a 3 or 4 year stretch there with ESPN that he would call me. I think it was like every Tuesday night. And we would just talk on the phone for an hour. And then Wednesday morning, there was an article by Mike and Matt. Just whatever what two of us chatted about for an hour. He'd bring up a handful of topics, or we'd just get off on a tangent, and he'd put it all together. And by noon the next day, it was a co-authored story that all I did was chat on the phone with him for. So he's awesome.
Fantastic. That's the best way to get your name on byline, I think.
Absolutely, but he's a good dude.
The toughest schedule for opposing quarterbacks in the NFL is the Chicago Bears. Their opposing quarterbacks this season average tier 2.32. So upper tier 2 quarterbacks. They've got a lot of tier 1s in there as well, with Aaron Rodgers twice, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray. I mean, that's a tough go for the Chicago Bears, who are a team that are hoping to have turned things around with their own quarterback. And by the way, if it's Andy Dalton who's starting all year, he's a late tier 3 quarterback according to those voting. And if you don't remember, there's only 4 tiers, so he's second to last tier and late in that tier.
Yeah, and what Mike does here is we've often referred to his quarterback tiers. So what he does is he just kind of averages out every quarterback on every team's schedule, assuming everyone stays healthy, which they won't, and realizes, wow, the Bears, they play Rodgers twice, Brady, Wilson, all those guys are tier 1 quarterbacks. They face the toughest slate of quarterbacks in the league, as you mentioned. And then he mentions who your quarterback is, which is Dalton, like you mentioned, who's near the bottom of the list. So in terms of strength of schedule quarterbacks, the Bears have it the hardest.
They have a big differential, 1.5 tiers worth of differential. The question is, Justin Fields, does he skew that differential? I mean, I have to imagine Justin Fields can roll in and be a tier 3 quarterback pretty easily his rookie season. And maybe when we're doing this list next year, we're talking about him as a tier 2 guy, right?
Yeah, and even if he's just really hard to play against, you know what I mean? There's no book on the guy. Super athletic, right, especially compared to Dalton. Everyone around the league has faced Dalton in some capacity, and I'm sure there's a book on him. I'm sure you ask any defensive coordinator on the Bears schedule, they'd rather line up against Dalton.
Yeah, because you get a guy like Justin Fields. Speaking of players, easily in my top 3 of players I want to see in the preseason is Justin Fields. But with his arm strength and his accuracy, he can just, even if things aren't going great, he'll make some big plays and some big throws in a game. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, crap, he runs 4.4 too. So he could take off and get some big chunk yardage. So I would imagine when there's no book on him, it might be pretty difficult to play against him, even if he's not completely developed as a quarterback yet in the NFL.
100%. I think that's 100% true. And I hope we see him soon. And of course, he'll be very high on the list of preseason players to watch.
The second most difficult opposing quarterback competition in the NFL in 2021 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their opposing quarterbacks average 2.36 tiers, but thankfully they have a tier 2 quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger, so the differential isn't as big as the Chicago Bears with Andy Dalton in there.
Yeah, and if you go by Vegas win totals, the Steelers and Raiders have the hardest schedules, period. No quarterbacks aside. I'm sure these things go hand in hand. If you have a good quarterback, you're a hard team to play against. I mean, I think the AFC North quarterback slates are pretty rough. You play Lamar twice, Burrow twice, Baker twice, and Wilson, Mahomes, and Rodgers are on the schedule as well. Josh Allen, that's a rough schedule.
Yeah, Lamar twice. Herbert's on there for the Steelers. You even got Tannehill and Carr and Burrow a couple times. By the way, reports haven't been great with Burrow's comeback and the Cincinnati Bengals offense. And you can't say we didn't warn him, Matt. It sounded like the offensive line's not doing a great job in camp, and the defensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals is giving the offensive line some troubles, which in turn is giving Joe Burrow some troubles. And look, he's coming off an ACL. Protect the young man. If he can't get the ball out to his first-round pick wide receiver, then what's the point, right?
Yeah, 100%. And maybe we shouldn't have been so ambitious with Burrow's, recovery and return. Will he play in the preseason? Who's to say? But yeah, the blurbs you're reading are, not going well for Burrow in this offense. We'll see.
Those are the tough decisions because Dak, it's like, who cares? Don't play him,
Right.
Other players coming off ACLs, Nick Bosa, he's like a 10-year veteran as a rookie. Don't play him until week 1. Doesn't matter at all. Joe Burrow, you want to get him some reps, but he's still not even close to a year from his ACL. So, those are the tough decisions in the preseason this year.
Yeah, without question. I mean, you're going to get him playing with Chase. You want to get that line used to him. He got thrown in the mix immediately as a year ago. He's very, very young. It's funny, actually, though. I'm sitting here looking at the Steelers group of quarterbacks they have to play, and one of their easy ones is Andy Dalton, which very well could be Justin Fields and be even harder.
I'm seeing a pattern here. NFC North, the third most difficult here is the Minnesota Vikings. Aaron Rodgers a couple times. Again, Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson, Matt Stafford, Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Ben Roethlisberger. So, difficult to go there for a Tier 2 quarterback in Kirk Cousins because his average quarterback competition will be better than him, according to GMs and coaches around the league. But not by a ton. But that's sort of the Kirk Cousins line. It's not quite Mendoza line. I think a Mendoza line in baseball's a lower level. Kirk Cousins is higher than that, but he's also like that level of, our team is, the worst playoff team or the best non-playoff team. That's the type of quarterback that Kirk Cousins is right now. And so a good quarterback might be better. A bad quarterback, you have the advantage because you have Kirk Cousins, who's a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah, and just looking at their list, well, it's pretty obvious the North plays the North, so there's a lot of good quarterbacks in both Norths, so they're high on this list. But, with all respect to Cousins, I get a lot of heat from Twitter saying you're too hard on him. I think he's average. Average isn't bad. Average isn't terrible, isn't great. But there's easily 6, 7, 8 games here where the Vikings are going to have the inferior quarterback. I mean, Dak and Stafford and Lamar and Russell and Rodgers twice. I mean, and then there's some that at least it's a competition. Mayfield, Ben, Burrow, who's the better player that given day or healthier. Tough sledding.
Obviously, the Lions have a fourth place schedule, so a little bit easier, but they're among some of the most difficult as well, being in the NFC North there. Let's finish out the top 5 teams, though. Fourth is the Washington football team. Again, Rodgers, Mahomes, Brady, Wilson, a bunch of Tier 1 quarterbacks, and then a bunch more Tier 2 quarterbacks with Josh Allen, who's probably potentially playing like a Tier 1 quarterback, too. So even that skews more difficult than it even looks on paper here. Dak a couple times. You got Justin Herbert. So Washington football team defense, who could be one of the better defensive units in the NFL, has their work cut out for them.
Yeah, and it just so happens some of these teams with the hardest quarterback slate don't have great quarterbacks either. Ben's in the Cousins, the Bears situation, Fitzpatrick. It's not exactly, Rodgers is going to square off against the best quarterbacks in the league,
Right. So, is it going to be Fitzmagic or Fitztragic? Is he behind in games and chucking off his back foot and throwing interceptions? Or is the defense keeping him close and he's going out there and helping him win some games? So that's going to be an interesting team to watch for sure in Washington. The last one here, actually, speaking of having a quarterback that has a better tier than opposing quarterbacks, Los Angeles Rams have the 5th most difficult quarterback schedule, but they're the first team to show up so far with the difficult quarterbacks that their quarterback in Matthew Stafford averages a higher ranking, 2.08 tier ranking for Matthew Stafford versus a 2.5 tier ranking for opposing quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I don't have much to add to that, but it's just I'm glad that one of these came up because it's not necessarily it doesn't matter what your quarterback is for this list, but he does mention it, and you can see, wow, that's a big discrepancy. So even though they face a brutal slate of quarterbacks, the Rams should be able to hang at least in the quarterback competition, which means Rams games might be a lot of fun to watch this year. And Kyler Murray twice, Wilson, Brady, Rodgers,
Yeah, all those teams in the West is going to be fun because, again, it's Stafford, Wilson, Kyler Murray a couple times. You got either Jimmy G or maybe Trey Lance, twice, maybe Jimmy G once, maybe Trey Lance once. So we'll see how that goes with quarterback in San Francisco, sort of like the Chicago Bears. How big of a tier?
And San Francisco 6 too, by the way.
Right, and so, you're right. Here they are. They're 6th on the list too. So difficult sledding in the North and in the West, especially if you are not the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go to the bottom of the list next, right? This is fun. Let's check out who has the easiest quarterback schedules in the NFL.
I'm Kevin Ostreicher, host of the Locked On Ravens podcast, and attention shoppers. We now have taste in the bread aisle, Dave's Killer Bread. That's right, an organic bread that doesn't need 3 spoonfuls of sriracha jam to delight your taste buds. Dave's Killer Bread is a 21-grain salute to the end of boring bread. a brand on a mission to make the most of every loaf, to rid the world of GMOs and artificial ingredients, and plant the seeds of good in all that they bake. But Dave's Killer Bread has done more than raise the bar on bread. In fact, Dave's Killer Bread was built on the belief that second chances can change lives when its founder Dave, the guy with a guitar you see on every loaf, returned to the family bakery after 15 years in prison. Dave took that chance and ended up creating what would become the country's #1 organic bread, while never forgetting his not-so-easy path. That's why at Dave's Killer Bread, they proudly practice second chance employment, hiring the best person for the job, regardless of criminal background. And by the taste of it, things have worked out rather well. Dave's Killer Bread. Bread amplified.
32 on the list, Matt, of the Mike Sando tiers, the opposing quarterback schedule, strength of schedule of opposing quarterbacks. I keep saying the title wrong. You know what I'm talking about. This is the easiest, though. 32 means you are the easiest. You have the lowest ranked opposing quarterbacks. Averaging tier 3.16 are the defending champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Tom Brady, a tier 1 quarterback. Obviously, this has to be the biggest differential in the positive side for your quarterback versus opposing quarterbacks. So things already weren't going to be pretty rosy for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on paper going into the 2021 season. You look at their opposing quarterbacks and, man, it looks even easier.
Holy smokes, this list is crazy. I mean, they're the Super Bowl champs, and frankly, they luck into this. It's not because they're champs. I mean, you would think they play a first-place schedule. Actually, they're a second-place schedule. Saints won the division. You'd have a better chance of running into some, big-time quarterbacks. Yeah, they got Josh Allen. Okay. Matt Stafford and Dak Prescott. Okay. But 5 of their games are against Tier 2 quarterbacks, and 2 of them are Matt Ryan, who, frankly, I don't know is a Tier 2 quarterback. And then the next most difficult quarterbacks they face are Carson Wentz, Daniel Jones, and Zach Wilson, and Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, Sam Darnold twice, Winston. I mean, man, this is an easy slate of quarterbacks.
Andy Dalton, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts. Will Dalton be the quarterback? We already know Carson Wentz. Well, what week did they play? It might be Carson Wentz, but it could be Jacob Eason. Who knows? It could be Sam Ehlinger. So it's like even this
Wentz
already.
Are the hardest guys they play against.
This got easier on schedule already. Drew Brees retired, so you either got Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston. Either way, it's a tier 4 quarterback according to the Sando tiers. So, man, this is why Vegas is heavy on Tampa Bay getting back to the Super Bowl this year.
Without question. And just looking at it now, this next team is a pretty good team too, with, a nice situation for them.
Again, another quarterback that, is kind of a tier 1, tier 2 quarterback, played like a tier 1. Show me again is what the coaches and GMs were saying for him to jump into that second tier, because he was, the top quarterback in tier 2, and that's Josh Allen. And he gets to go against opposing quarterbacks that average tier 3.13. So not quite as big of a gap as Tom Brady's Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but still it's a nice little quarterback schedule here for the Buffalo Bills, who are hoping to go back to the division champion, back in the playoffs and deep in the playoffs.
Yeah, and Mahomes and Brady are on the slate for the Bills. Fine. But 10 of their 17 games are against tier 4 quarterbacks. Blah. I mean, you got to be favored in all those, and probably, I'm not going to say they're going to win them all, but man, that sets up pretty darn well for the Bills.
Yeah, Tua twice, Cam or maybe Mac Jones in there, Zach Wilson. You get a rookie Zach Wilson a couple of times there. We'll see how good he looks. Another rookie in Trevor Lawrence on the schedule. So this one could potentially trend more difficult than it looks like on paper, but still, even then, it's not a bad schedule of opposing quarterbacks at all.
No, again, I mean, Matt Ryan is the 3rd hardest quarterback you play as it stands right now. And you're right, the Lawrences, the Wilsons, we mentioned Fields. They could muck this thing up and be harder to play against in November than it looks right now, without question. But we have a pretty good idea who these players are.
Right, and we'll see what happens with Zach Wilson, because his New York Jets are next. They're 30th in the NFC East. Again, it's Brady, Josh Allen twice, then you get Matt Ryan, Tannehill, and then things get much easier from there the rest of the way. But again, a couple quarterbacks that could be a little bit more difficult depending on how things go with development. Jalen Hurts and Tua a couple times. Is it Cam Newton all year? Is it Mac Jones? Sam Darnold, is there more there than we know? Trevor Lawrence. So again, this is one that could skew more difficult for opposing quarterbacks, but on paper, looks good for the New York Jets to have maybe start their rebuild with a few W's in 2021.
Yeah, and I mean, the Jets have the third easiest slate per these rankings, but they're still behind. I mean, they're still minus 0.5 because Zach Wilson, which again is really an unknown. Who knows how he is, but they may not be able to capitalize on it like Allen and Brady can.
NFC South, again, Atlanta Falcons here, the 29th most difficult opposing quarterback schedule, averaging a tier 3.06 quarterbacks on the season, with their quarterback better than that in the 2.36 tier average range, according to GMs and coaches around the league. Tom Brady a couple times is obviously the most difficult part of their schedule. Josh Allen in there with Dak Prescott. And then it goes directly to Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo, Daniel Jones. I mean, that is a huge drop-off from Tier 2 to what they're going to see. But again, some young quarterbacks that could maybe be better than what they're being ranked out as. With Jimmy Garoppolo, does that become Trey Lance? Zach Wilson's on the schedule. Trevor Lawrence is on the schedule. You get Sam Darnold a couple times. Can Peyton work some magic with Jameis Winston in New Orleans? So those questions, it could be, again, a more difficult schedule, but even still, best case scenario, that's a huge drop-off to Jared Goff being your fourth most difficult opponent at quarterback.
Yeah, right. That's the thing that jumped out at me is Goff's the fourth hardest quarterback you're going to play. And the real difference between them and Tampa is Tampa has to play against Ryan twice, where Atlanta has to play against Brady twice. So I'd rather play against Ryan than Brady.
Absolutely.
So
and
interesting.
Those defenses would rather play that Falcons defense than the Tampa defense quite a bit.
Absolutely. That's kind of what I was thinking is maybe new coach in Atlanta's defense and head coach, not a difficult slate of quarterbacks. Maybe the Atlanta D takes a step forward and looks better and is more productive.
Last one here, and you hope it's Dak Prescott that's healthy and playing for the Dallas Cowboys, who have the fifth easiest opponent quarterback schedule, averaging a tier 3 quarterbacks with their own high tier 2 quarterback in Dak Prescott. They got Mahomes on the schedule. They got Brady on the schedule. Justin Herbert, I'm very bullish on him in year 2. I've seen some wow throws from him in training camp already. I mean, he just looks like so much the real deal. Then it's Matt Ryan, Kyler Murray, some that could be pretty difficult, but the end of their schedule looks really nice. You get Jalen Hurts and the Eagles a couple times. Whoever's quarterback at Bridgewater or Locke, looking like Locke is winning that competition so far early going in camp with the Broncos. You get Cam Newton in there. Maybe it's a rookie in Mac Jones. Doesn't scare you probably either way. This isn't the Cam Newton of 2015. Jameis Winston, Sam Darnold, Fitzpatrick a couple times, Daniel Jones a couple times, and then some middling quarterbacks with Cousins and Carr, Murray. So some winnable opponents there for that powerhouse Dallas Cowboys offense. Can their defense slow down those quarterbacks we're talking about?
Yeah, sort of like I said with Atlanta, maybe Dallas's D perceives to take a step forward, younger, reduce their number of mental errors and coverage busts. But what stands out here, which isn't real rocket science to figure out, is the 6 most important games on their schedule are against Daniel Jones, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Jalen Hurts in the division. Like, is there a bigger gap between 1 and 2 at the quarterback position than the NFC East? Well, probably the NFC North. Rodgers is clearly better than the second best quarterback.
But at least with the North, with Cousins and the potential of what Justin Fields could be, that is still something I'd rather face all those quarterbacks in the East than those two guys.
Yes, Cousins is way better than Jones, Fitzpatrick, or Hurts.
Right.
And what Fields might be is probably better than all those guys, too.
Absolutely.
Certainly is.
Good stuff. That is the 5 most difficult quarterback schedules and the 5 easiest quarterback schedules in the NFL coming up in 2021. Hat tip to Mike Sando and his quarterback tiers, a Hall of Fame voter. We should get him on the podcast absolutely next week.
Hoping to run into him.
He's a busy man, I know, but he's a friend of the pod. Maybe we can get him on for at least a quick segment, Matt. If you see him face-to-face, do some
I'll buy him a cold one and sweet talk him.
There you go. Yeah, that'll do it. Then he can't say no if he's had a couple of brews, right?
No, I'm a charming guy.
Isn't this odd, though? You're going to see colleagues in person, and that's wild, right?
I know. I mean, last time that was possible was 2 years combine ago, I guess.
Yeah.
Before I remember driving home and hearing the word COVID for like the first time. I'm like, what's COVID? It's no big deal. Don't worry about it.
That's not going to, come on.
Right, come on.
Well, face-to-face, football, fans, games happening. Love it. And Matt and I have you covered every day of it all right here. Peacock and Williamson.
This episode is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Have you ever listened to a podcast like this one and you wanted to bring up your own point or just chat with other people that are listening at the same time? Well, let me tell you about Spotify Green Room. This is the first social audio platform made just for sports fans. The app is free to download, and once you're in, you can talk with us, other fans, athletes, insiders in real time about your favorite sport or team. Download the app, currently available on iOS devices. Create a profile, link your Twitter, join one of the groups for the latest league updates, and then you'll see us there. Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports.